Yeah. So before we actually go to the component lifecycle, I want you to know the practical use cases of the state, especially in class components. So we'll just go with that. As the previous trainers explained clearly about the state, that it is a built-in React object that is kind of used to contain any data or information in its properties about the component, so that we can manage and track the behavior of the component by updating or modifying the state. So basically, one difference between props and state is that prop is not mutable, whereas state is. That is why like props are passed from the parent component to the child component, but states are kind of bound to that component, and they cannot be accessed by child components unless you pass it through the props or something like that. So that is why we use state, because they are mutable, and they are like there are some do's and don'ts that we'll look into. Like for example, they are not to be overwritten manually. So we'll look into that when we see the example. So basically, I have created a components folder here, and I have created a class component. I hope you know how to create this. Just extend it to, with the component class, and then we have a constructor here. So in this constructor, it is suggested that you define the state. Now I'm not passing any props in here, but still it is a good practice that you mention this props as parameters. And then the first thing that we usually do in the constructor in JavaScript is call the super method, because we are extending from the parent component. Yeah, and also mention the props. So how to basically create the state in class component is that we write this, and then we write state, and we use the kind of object literal form, and then we mention the properties that we want to mention in that object. So like I'm mentioning, members is equal to 0 for now. So this is how we create the state, and we'll be updating the state, but it may seem that state is like it is defined by us. So like how we'll update it, we should directly override it, but this state is actually a built-in object. So we'll see that. And yeah, how to print that state and while rendering is you just mention the curly braces, and then whatever property you have to, you can just access it like we access the object property. So this dot state dot members, and you can see the members as 0 is printed. Now what I want to do here is I've created a button. Yeah, and somebody had asked about how to include the bootstrap thing. So I have just included that. You just have to mention the CDN links. That is why it is like it is applied. Yeah. So yeah. So what I want to do is whenever we click this button, I want this members to be updated. And as you know, in React, whenever the state is updated, there is kind of hot reloading, and the UI is basically updated. The components are updated. So for that, I'm going to add a click listener here. I hope you know how this works. Like you just have to mention the function name. So I'll be creating that function. And like as I said earlier, you might think that state is like we have defined the state here, so we can just change it manually, like this dot state dot this dot state is equal to members, and then access the state like this dot state dot members, and then +1 or do something like that. This is I'm accessing it, and then I'm adding it, and that is how we modify. But the thing is, we'll get an error. It won't work. Yeah. So it gives an error that cannot read properties of undefined. Okay. Yeah. Before that, let me just explain the concept of this. Let me just log in here. Uh, this dot state dot numbers. Yeah. So it says that cannot read properties of undefined. So why is that? Is because when we refer to this inside of a function, then this basically refers to the reference reference of that lexical scoping, you can say, of that like this function basically, and it does not refer to the instance of the component, the actual component. But this state is associated to this instance, right, of the actual component. So what we have to do is we have to tell React that whenever we use this keyword inside of any function, then I want to refer it to this, which is the instance of the component. So what I'm going to do is, and it is suggested that you better do this binding in constructor. So I'm just going to change the definition of this function and say that whenever I use this keyword inside of this function, then I want to refer this as the instance of the component. Now I'm calling this bind function inside the constructor, and inside the constructor, this basically refers to the instance of the component. So this context is passed to this function, and we have kind of modified the reference of this. So now if you see, then it will give me 0. Now it is working correctly. Yeah, so sorry, what? Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
Yeah, okay.
You can continue.
So, like I said before, we want to modify the state, right? So we are accessing this members property of the state and then adding 1 to it, and then I'm redefining the state. So, like, let's just see if this works. Yeah, so we get an error here, or you can say warning that do not mutate the state directly, use set state instead. So why this happens is, as I said earlier, that whenever the state is changed, the components are re-rendered. So React has to know that the state has been changed. So it suggests us to use the set state method instead, this dot set state, and pass this new state of that to this method. I'm just passing it as members as this dot state here copy. So what happens is it will take the state and it will update it itself, and then inside the React it has a callback that the component or the node which has been updated, it will basically re-render. So that callback it has to work. So that is why React suggests us to use the set state method instead. So now if we check this, then you are able to see that the state is updated and also it is rendered into the component. And yeah, so the next thing is, let's say I want to make another function. Okay, before that, I just showed you one method to bind this. There is another method which is often used, but it is not suggested because it has kind of high time complexity. So that method is basic. Okay, I have to. So that method is basically you kind of pass an arrow function there. And in that, one advantage of this arrow function is that you can also pass the synthetic events, like the events with which the user interacts. So this event object you can pass and then you can use it. And along with that, you can pass additional parameters that you want. So this is one advantage. So why, like how this works is you do not have to find this, and arrow functions generally pass the context on its own. So it will pass the context of this as this entire lexical kind of scope, you can say, of this components instance. So it will automatically consider, like it will automatically refer to this keyword as the instance of the component. So we can use it. And you can see that this is still working. We have commented the binding thing here. Yeah. Then the next thing is, suppose I want to have a functionality that, okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, I want to have a functionality that whenever I click on add more, then the members should be updated by a large number, like 2-3 times or something. So I'm creating, I have linked this add more here. I have to also bind it. As I said, it is suggested to do this here instead of here, because whenever the component is kind of re-rendered, then this definition or this binding, if you do here, then this definition will be, method will be basically defined again and again after every update. So it is better to do it at once. Yeah, so I'm creating a function called add more, and I'm binding this. So whenever this function will be called, this function add members function will be called multiple times, like 4 times it will be called, so that the state will be, the members will be updated 4 times, increased 4 times. So this is the functionality. So let's just check if that works. Yeah. So as you can see, we have called the function 4 times, but the updatation is just 1 time. Like at the one click, it is just happening once. So why this is because the calls to the set state are basically asynchronous. So what React is famous for its asynchronous feature, so that the updatation is faster and it maintains the kind of update queue, and every update is into the different thread, and that is why the set state methods are called in different threads, and they are not chained, to be honest. So they are not synchronized, they are working asynchronously. So it kind of all these methods are run at once. So that is why we have to kind of chain those calls of the set state. So that is why what we are going to do is we have to access the previous state. Yeah, we have to basically pass a method instead, and that method can take a parameter which will be the previous state. Like I'm referring it to as state, previous state. You can even say state. So that parameter we can easily access it here, and then we have to return the new state that we have to assign, which React will assign actually in the background. So that I will write as this dot state dot members as +1. Oh, okay. And you should actually write previous state dot members +1, and yeah. So now if you can see, it is updated 4 times. So it basically checks that the update queue, like the previous update in the update queue is occurred or not, and then it kind of updates the next state. So yeah, and one more thing is that if you kind of try to console log here something, as I said, this is asynchronous, calls to this is asynchronous, so it will be like set state is called in another thread, and console logging is done in another thread. So maybe the computation or the time required for this is greater than console.log. Then if you want to log it after the update, then it won't work. So what you have to do is, instead you can pass a callback here, which will be called by React itself, and then you can console.log something you can console log. So this will occur after the state is changed, not before that. And it is occurring 4 times because we are calling it 4 times. Yeah, so this was about the part which we had to cover before moving towards the component lifecycle. I hope this is clear. Yeah. Okay. If you have any doubts, then you can ping there. Yeah. So let's move towards the component lifecycle. So what is lifecycle? As the name suggests, it is kind of the stages the component goes through during its lifetime. So these stages, at these particular stages, we kind of have predefined functions which are given by React, and we can actually override those functions to kind of modify the interaction. So you can say change the behavior or make some calls and use some conditions and uh, affect how the UI is kind of rendered. So these are to be overridden by us, and we'll see it in the examples. But before that, let's just see what are those life cycle stages. So the first one is initialization stage. This is the stage when the component instance is created. So the constructor is basically called. The JSX is kind of transpiled, and the nodes are created, nodes are inserted. Then yeah, you have to mention the default state actually. At this point, it is like a good practice to define it here. Then the next is mounting stage, when the nodes are actually inserted in DOM and the page is kind of rendered. So yeah, and the next stage is updating stage. Whenever the state goes into some modifications, the component is basically re-rendered, and this is kind of modifying the nodes. And yeah, so we'll see the methods related to that. This is the most important stage. And the next stage is the terminal stage, which is unmounting stage. This is when the node is kind of removed from DOM, and before that all the variables are destroyed. Then like memory is deallocated and that stuff is going on. And we have one more stage, which is error handling, which is kind of synchronous to all the stages, and it occurs simultaneously throughout the life cycle. So it is when any error or bug occurs during the life cycle. So during any rendering of the component, or at any of these methods which we have overridden during this life cycle stages, or if there is any bug in the child component. So even if we are passing any context or something, there is a context, there is an error in the context, then also the error is occurred, and then we have some functions to be overridden. And these methods are basically for the class components. So for the functional components, we have the use effect hook specially. So we'll look into that, how to achieve all these methods using that. So let's first see the initialization stage. And like I said, this is the perfect place to kind of define the default state and bind the stuff. So let's see an example. Yes, so I have this initialization stage and mounting stage are often considered together. So you can mention it as just mounting stage. So I'm having a constructor here. The only method which is related to initialization is the constructor, of course, which is called when the instance is created. So you have to mention the super and you have to create the state, then you can bind some variables. And this is strictly not the place where you should make any API calls or AJAX calls or any other stateful API calls. So because this is like happening just once, that is why. So yeah, this I have. So yeah, so the first method that is invoked is always a constructor. I have just logged in. Then you can see the next method in the mounting phase after initialization. Directly the mounting phase starts, and the first method that you have is get derived state from props. So this is kind of a static method. And what it does is basically it tries to maintain the syncing between props and state. So if you have any update over the props or update over the state, then you have to kind of sometimes make a check that is my state in some relevance to props. That relevance we can decide by our own logic. So it takes the props and state as parameters. What I'm going to do here is that I'm having members and I'm passing, I'm passing the members props as 100. So I have to check that, I have to make a check that if the like these members are 100, then I have to print something. So before that, I'll just log this method. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It should actually return the state which you have to update. So that is why it is giving an error. But you can see that the next method after the constructor is get derived state from props. So I have to make a check that if the props.members are equal to the state.members, state.members, and I'm just going to log that the limit is reached. If the maximum limit was of 100 members, and then I'm supposed to return the state that that I have to change basically. So I'm just writing members as what it was 100, and or you can see something, say something like okay, fine, 100 is fine, and you can even say like limit is reached, but for now I'm not changing the state, and else you can just return null. This is not the case, then you can just return null, and okay, am I calling that? Okay, it should technically call this state dot members, and I'm logging this, and else return null. I'll just okay, maybe this check is not 100. Okay, yeah, I'm not having that as 100. Okay, yeah, I have to first do it as 100. Yeah. Yeah, now it is shown that the limit is reached, and this is successfully logging that the limit is reached. Else, if this is not the case, then you can just return null. And this is basically useful, like I said, if you have to make sure that the state and the props are in sync. So any of the conditional logic that you will have in your component, then this is the perfect place to keep it, and it immediately calls after the getter after the constructor. So before the updatation, if you have to do anything, then you can do it here. Then the next method, which is called is the render method in the mounting phase only. So I'm just I hope you know about the render method. I'm just logging it here. So you can see after the get derived state from props, render method is called. This is basically it returns the JSX, which is transpiled by the Babel, and then it converts into node by using that react.create element, and then we kind of see the UI on the browser. And the next method is basically component dead mount. Now this is an especially useful method. This is called after render method. So you have performed some JavaScript and using HTML, then you would have definitely used something like window.onload or document.onload, something like that. So this method kind of behaves like that. It is called when the component is mounted into the doc. So it makes sure that the nodes are kind of visible, and then only it is executed. So this is the perfect place if you want to grab any nodes and make some changes to that. So what I'll do is just create an element. I'll create a paragraph element, and okay, before that I'll just log in. And I'll just take this element, this div basically, which has the class name. I'll just do query selector. And I'll just append it to that. Don't forget the this keyword because this is a class. Use the HTML part of this as something like hope you are enjoying the session. Yeah, and why did I do this here is because I'm making sure that this element, this node, is visible into the DOM. That is why I preferred this method, which is called after the mounting is done. So now you can see it is visible that hope you are enjoying the session, and component did mount is logged after the render method. Yeah, so that was about the mounting methods. Let's move on to updating methods. So the first one is, I'll just change it here first. Again, passing the members as 50 as the props. Yeah. So I have to just ignore this part for now. I'll come to that later. So I have just created a state, and again the members are 0 and limit is not reached. So I have to increase, I have mentioned a method here add 10, which will increase the state members by 10. So this is like I have said earlier, you have to pass the previous state to make sure that you can access it and it is not asynchronous. And what I'm going to do is, okay, first let's just see this, how it looks. Yeah. So this is the members as 0, and when I want to, when I'm adding 10 here, then the members are updating, but they are going beyond 50, and I want to check that it should stop at 50. So what I'm going to do is use get derived state from props again. And this method is particularly common in both the updating as well as the mounting phase. Mounting phase. So it is called before the initial mount also, and before the before any of the updates also. So you can just check before updating that the props and state are again inside. So I'll first log in. I'm going to make a check that if the state dot members, which I'm because we are checking that if they are in sync, we have to access those parameters as props and state. So if the state dot members is greater than the props dot members, is 50, which I had passed in here. Uh, in here. So if they are greater, then I have to just change this limit. So I'm just using this dot set state, and I'll just change it manually. Doesn't matter. And the limit I'm changing has to reached. And now you will see that limit in here. So limit is not reached, but yeah, okay, I'm not returning this. I'm supposed to return. Or you can just create a state manually in here and then return it. Else I have to just return null. Okay. Yeah, so now if I'm adding to this, then the uh, should technically state.members is greater than props.members. Okay, it is not updating the limit. I'll come back to that later. But yeah, this is how you are going to make the check before updating. And if you do not have to change any state, then you have to return null. So the next method is should component update method. So you basically use that when the component is to be updated. So when you have to kind of check that are my new state and new props to be rendered, even if they are changed, then you kind of use that method. Props and state again. I'll say it as new state because the state has been updated, but I have to decide that should I actually render it or not. So it basically you have to return true or false. So if I say like if my props.members are okay, state.members are greater than props.members, then I don't want to update that, update the state. So that is why I'm returning false in here, and else I'll just return true. Uh, okay, new state. Yeah, so as you can see, it stopped at 50 because I'm not updating the state. Like internally it is updated, but I'm not rendering that update because I'm returning false to this. But if you want to render that update, because till 50, this check will not be like it won't resolve to true. So it will until 50 it will return true. That is why the update would be rendered and not just updated into the state. So this is how should component update works. Then the next method, uh, the next method is basically deprecated. This and these two methods are deprecated in the newer versions of React. So this method is basically called only if the should component update method returns true. So as you can sense that even if like we had used this method, then the logic we can even use it in this method. So that is why it is deprecated. And the next method is get snapshot before update. So this method basically stores the state, or you can say, as the name suggests, it kind of takes the snapshot of the component. So this snapshot includes the nodes as well as the state particularly. So you can use that state because after the updatation, if you want to get back to the previous state, then this is useful. So I'll define this method. So this basically takes the props in the state. And what I want to do is I want to return. Okay, I'll print it before that. So I want to return as a snapshot, I want to return the state.members. And this method, like if there is no change, then I have to return the null. And this method is particularly used in conjunction with the next method, which is component did update. So whatever I want to define as the snapshot is basically whatever I'm returning here. So I'm using component did update method in conjunction with this. So this method is called after the update is over. So if you want to get the previous state's members, then you have to, along with the state and props, you have to get that snapshot, which will be which will be returned from this method, get snapshot before update. So you can just log that snapshot, which will be this previous state's members, or you can just pass in here. I'm just gonna use this node and I'm just gonna put it in here. This. So this will store the initial state, then the update will be caused, the render method will be called, and then this method will be called, and then it will return the stored state to this method, which we will access using the snapshot. Then we are doing some stuff like changing the inner HTML and that. So as you can see, whenever this is 20, the initial like before rendering it was 10. So this is updated in here because we have mentioned that snapshot. It has stored that snapshot and we are utilizing it using this method. So that was about the updating methods. So let's move on to unmounting methods. So unmounting, as I said, is the stage when the like the memory is kind of variables are destroyed and memory is deallocated and that stuff is going on. So this is a perfect place to kind of clear the variables or any eventlessness you have. So yeah, so for now I'm just gonna use component dead mount method first. This method is not related to unmounting, but I'm making sure that the component is rendered because I have to use the set interval method, which is related to time. So before that, I'm going to check this. And yeah, so I'm just gonna create some counter in here. I'm having the state defined as time as 0. So I'm using that counter. I hope you know the set interval method. If not, then it is kind of, it basically takes two parameters. The first one is the method or function which you want to call after certain intervals. And that interval is the second parameter, which is kind of, you can say, delay of time in milliseconds. So like after every 1000 milliseconds, this whatever function will define in here, this will be called. So I'm going to change the state of this and I'm just going to say time as previous and plus 1. So this will be the counter and this will be called, and you can see the time. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so you can see the counter in here. It is updated every 1000 milliseconds. Now what I want to do is that suppose my component is to be unmounted. So I want to make sure that this timer, which is kind of a complex thing, it adds more complexity. So I want to make sure that it is being cleared. So what I'll do is I'll just say window dot, I'll just say clear interval. I'll just mention this dot counter because I had name that interval. So you won't be able to see it in practice, but because I would have to close the page and then you wouldn't see that it is actually destroyed, or else I would have to unmount this in the code, but this is not suggested by React. So just know that this works and this is a perfect place. And apart from that, if you want to make any AJAX calls or any API calls, then component did mount or component did update is a good place to do that, because the state is perfectly changed and it is also rendered. And another thing to note about the updating one is that get snapshot before update. The calls to this are actually asynchronous, but this method, like the calls to state are asynchronous or the updates. But this method takes care of that because, as I said, there is kind of an update queue that React maintains, and this is called after every update is updated, rendered into the DOM. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, this was about the unmounting methods. Now there is a simultaneous stage, as I mentioned, which is of error handling. So there are two methods: get derived state from error and component dead catch. So I'll just yeah. So what I'm doing in here is so I have created a state where the errors are false, and whenever the error is occurred, then I have to make it true. So I have created, as I said earlier, that if there is an error in the child component or any context that is passed, then the error will be transferred to the parent component, and then you can check the information of that error. So I have this test component here. And what I'm going to do is the test component does not have any state. So I'm just going to access a property which is not present in the state. So this should, like if you don't mention the strict mode in React, then it will give you undefined. But because I have mentioned this, then it will give me error because such property doesn't exist. So yeah, and we have to use this method called get derived state from error. And this is also a static method, so you cannot call it on your own. And this the errors that the error whenever the error occurs or the bug is there, then that error object is which has kind of information related to line number and all that, and all the stack calls and such things. And that object, you can access it as the parameter, and you can just log it to the console. Error. Yeah, so now there will be an error. So this is what React has done, like at its end. But the thing we printed out here is this, and regarding the information of the stack calls of those errors and how they were kind of passed in. So that is regarding this. And there is another method which is component dead catch. This is kind of similar to this method, but it is quite used when you have to transfer that error information to any different service. Like this method was particularly useful when there are enterprise applications and then you have to change the state, because make any changes to the states or something like that, because whenever there is error, then you have to handle it, right? You cannot just keep it like that. So I'm just going to set state, do the call the set state method, and I'm just going to change it manually that errors are true. So this is useful in such cases because you are managing those errors effectively. Yeah, I'm not printing it here because anyways it is an error. And this method, so whenever you have any API calls or anything like that, then you have to pass those errors to that that calls, and you have to kind of handle that error information there. Then you can use this with any service. And apart from that, yeah. So let's move. This was about the lifecycle methods in the class component. So let's see how to use the lifecycle methods, or you can say hooks, which is the use effect hook, to achieve such behavior that we achieved in here. So the first one, like the this behavior is basically achieved using use effect hook, and as Anuja told, that it is kind of method which does the side effects. So it takes two parameters. The first one is the function, and the function which will kind of be called by React whenever the dependency is changed, and the second parameter is the actual dependency that we pass. So based on the criteria of that dependency, the use effect hook achieve the behavior that is achieved by the components that we saw, methods that we saw above. So the first one is if we pass an empty dependency. Okay. Okay, which one is this? For now, we don't want it. The first one, yeah. So the first one is when you pass an empty dependency array, then this works as the component dead mount method. So to achieve that, I have created yeah. So I'm gonna yeah, I have imported the useState and useEffect methods hooks. I'm just gonna use that. Uh, the default value I'm setting it as the capital one. I'm creating three such states. Yeah, and yeah. So what I want to do is okay. So what I want to do is whenever I say click on change A, then this and like there is another button called change B. So both of them should turn to the small letters. So I'll define those methods in here. So before that, I want to, okay, I'll define the change first. So whatever you will pass in here, uh, okay. Change B. Okay, this dot change B I have to say. And missing semicolon. Okay, anyways, I'll just show the use effect hook. You have to pass a function in here, and what I'm doing is document dot add. Okay, I'll first select that node. Okay. and change a method I'm going to define. Okay, oh, okay, sorry. This is a functional component, so I have to, yeah. So I'll just change this to small one. And this I have purposely added the event listener here because I have to show the how it works when we unmount it. I have to clear that listener. So whenever you pass an like when you don't pass any second parameter, or even if you pass an empty array in here, then this method will be called uh, when the component is actually mounted. So I'll just say component did mount in here. So this basically works like this. Yeah, so the component has been mounted, so you can see the log. So this was about, yeah, and like I said, after the mounting, you can make any changes to the dongle or add any listeners. So I have purposely done it inside of this. Then the next use of this use effect is when you pass the dependency array. So I'll say component did mount did update. So I'm passing the dependency as the two states, which are A and B. So whenever A changes or either B changes, then this will be called. And also whenever the first time the component is mounted, uh, at that time also this function will be called, this callback which we are giving. So if I say change, like you can see before I click this button, the component was mounted, so that is why this was also printed. And whenever I change A or change B, let me just okay, I'm not using a class component, so change B set B, okay. Just do it again. Yeah, so whenever I change A, then the console.log is working. And whenever I change B, then also it is logging in here. And the last one of use effect, like how it is used, is you are returning a function which will basically do something like for example, I'm doing window.remove listener, and then I'm passing click in here, and the function name is change A. That is why I had purposely named it in here. So what this does is you can optionally pass in the empty array here. So what this does is this function or the callback will be returned, and React will basically call this function which is defined before unmounting the component. So you cannot actually save, like I said, because then I have to close the window and all that stuff. But this works. So if you have to like clear any variables or remove any listeners, or maybe you are using APIs like event-driven APIs and you have to close the subscription to that, or if you are using sockets, then you have to close the socket. So that stuff you can do in here inside this method. So yeah, that was about how use effect can be used for achieving these three. And remember that if you pass any dependency array, then like at the mounting stage also the method will be called.